Good evening. Welcome to this community conversation presented by the Path Foundation. My name's Randy Rieland, and I'm a journalist who has written about substance abuse and recovery in a newspaper series titled Opioid Ripples. Tonight, we'll be discussing the impact of the COVID pandemic in increasing mental health and substance abuse challenges in the community, and also its effect on treatment and recovery programs. We'll also talk about how to recognize signs of mental health issues and substance abuse in yourself, friends, or family members, and how to take the first step in getting help. I'm honored to be joined by two people who know firsthand the power of addiction and substance abuse, but also the joy and fulfillment of recovery. Chris Herron played in the NBA with the Denver Nuggets and the Boston Celtics, and later with a number of professional basketball teams in Europe and China. But Chris also struggled with substance use for much of his career, including with pharmaceutical painkillers. In 2008, he overdosed for the fourth time and crashed his car. Soon thereafter, he began his recovery. Chris now gives motivational speeches around the world, and in 2018, he founded Herren Wellness, a residential recovery program. Last fall, Herren Wellness opened a new center at Twin Oaks in Warrenton, Virginia. The Reverend Jan Brown likewise has battled with addiction, but has been in recovery, free of drugs and alcohol, since January 1st, 1987. She's an ordained deacon in the Episcopal Church, serving at Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg, Virginia. She's also a sought-after speaker on many aspects of substance abuse recovery. And in 2014, she was appointed to serve on the Governor's Task Force on Prescription Drug and Heroin Abuse. Reverend Brown is also the founder and executive director of SpiritWorks Foundation Center for the Soul. In 2018, SpiritWorks opened a peer-to-peer addiction recovery consulting center in Warrenton. Now, if you have a question you'd like to ask them anonymously, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type your question when the window appears. We'll try to get to as many of these as we can. First, Chris and Jan, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And
thank you.
I would, I know there've been a lot of consequences of living with a pandemic, but two that most of us have experienced is increased stress and social isolation. And I would think that someone struggling with substance use, whether it's drugs or alcohol, that can be a really destructive combination. Chris, I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about your experience and why that combination of stress and social isolation could really intensify someone's substance use and make recovery more difficult.
You know, I'm first and foremost, it's an honor to share the screen with both of you tonight. You know, the impacts of isolation, stress, anxiety pertaining to substance use, you know, has been critical for many, many people. I mean, we in recovery, you know, depend on connection. You know, we depend on relationships. We show up to places to share our story and listen to others. You know, I'm a big, you know, I'm into high fives and hugs. I'm into, you know, relationships and I'm very dependent on that. I'm fortunate being a man in recovery that has access to Herren Wellness, you know, to share the room with people who are struggling, people just like me, and be part of their journey and they be part of mine. So I've been fortunate. Unfortunately, there are people out there that don't have that access. That access has been shut off and they've been, you know, dependent on platforms like this, Zoom. You know, and that's not easy for a lot of people.
Yeah. Jan, I wondered what's your perspective on that? And I wondered if you also could talk a bit about the impact of COVID on providing treatment and counseling. For instance, I know that peer-to-peer groups such as AA and NA have really had to move to virtual meetings.
Sure. And again, similarly to Chris, thanks for having me. And I'm really glad to be here with you both tonight. Similarly to what Chris said, just the recognition that recovery happens in community. And so when people are cut off from their support system, from the face-to-face meetings, from being able to connect before the meetings and after the meetings and those kinds of activities, it makes it much more challenging to be able to recover. We also know that addiction is a disease of isolation. And so primarily emotional isolation. So if you add the physical isolation to that, once again, it makes it much more difficult. Many people have heard the quotation or saying that says the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is human connection. Mm-hmm. So once again, it just really reinforces the need for that relationship, connection, and community. In terms of the services, they all had to go online. And challengingly, just because you run a peer-to-peer organization doesn't mean that you have access to or know anything about technology. You know something about recovery. And so, for many of these mutual support groups, it took a little bit of time to get them up and running. And, they're not for everyone. And so, and equally, around issues of equity, everyone doesn't have access to the technology. They don't have access to stable broadband. And so while many people were able to make that pivot or shift, there were probably many more who were not. In rural areas, it's really difficult to be able to maintain a connection. And so that was really difficult. The pivot to telehealth and telemedicine has been, again, really helpful for those who could access it. And those things are here to stay. I mean, I think one of the positive pieces that has come out of this is that the hope is that, mutual support groups will always be online. Not to say that face-to-face, we can't wait to get back. And also telemedicine, I think, and telehealth will also.
Right. So I know, Chris, the pandemic has really affected everyone, but I wondered if you've noticed any difference in who's been seeking treatment during COVID. Are there any trends you've noticed? Younger, older, more men, more women? What have you been seeing?
I think initially at Herren Wellness, it was the majority of the concern was coming from parents with young adults. Mm-hmm. Kids were called home. Parents had eyes on their children 24/7, young adults, and some of, their mental health or substance use was glaring. And, initially, when COVID first came out, most of the phone calls, the outreach was coming from parents about their children, of young adults. Interestingly enough, I think we then pivoted to adult males, adult men. As we talked about initially, the isolation and, it can be glaring. When you struggle, it can be glaring to the people who love you. And, when we're all under one roof and we're struggling, our loved ones can identify it much quicker. So it then pivoted to men, and then I saw a shift into moms, into women. Today, it's back to somewhat, normal, where our calls are coming from young adults, male and female, moms and dads. But the initial was young adults, and it's tough to hide under one roof. It really is. It's tough to hide, and although isolation, is part of addiction. And there's a lot of people out there that, their addiction has kind of held them hostage. It's kind of given them a pass not to see loved ones. So I think once this, people are vaccinated and families are reconnecting, I think they're gonna knock on the door of their loved one who just spent the last year of their life in their home struggling. Right.
So Jan, in terms of, I'm wondering if you've noticed any difference in the types of substances that are being abused. Are we seeing more issues with alcohol during the pandemic? Any other drugs, I know fentanyl and cocaine and heroin certainly has become a bigger problem, but I just wonder if there are any trends that you're seeing there.
Absolutely. There's been a rather significant increase in issues with alcohol. And part of that is because the access to alcohol has remained available during this time period. So, our ABC stores are open. People can have cocktails and have cocktails to go and those kinds of things. So certainly that is one of the trends, if you will, that we've seen. The other piece has been the increase in what we would consider the bad drug supply. So it's easier to get those types of drugs in the hands of people because it takes less to move it around. And so, we're seeing much more fentanyl in things that historically we hadn't seen fentanyl mixed in. So originally it was heroin. As you mentioned, we're now seeing fentanyl mixed in with methamphetamines and mixed in with cocaine as well. So yes, that's what we've been seeing.
Right. Chris, I know there's been, in recent years, there's been a raised awareness of substance abuse and recovery, and I think it's largely due to the opioid epidemic. But I wondered, from your perspective, what do most people still not understand about addiction and alcoholism?
Oh gosh, I think we've worked really hard, and with people in long-term recovery who I admire and look up to. I think the stigma of addiction, we've worked really hard to take that away, but it's still there, right? I think I have a lot of experience working with our youth, getting in front of children between the age of 12 to 18. And, I think when it comes to addiction, I think we've put so much focus on the worst day and we forget the first day. I think we talk about, what happens to you in the end rather than why it's beginning. And that's why I'm such an advocate for, wellness being a core class in our school system. I can't believe that's not in our education, and that's not in our core classes for our children. The focus on the worst day and not the first day, I think is critical. I think when I went into schools and I shared my story, it was really hard for kids to identify with me. But when I pivoted and started doing my presentation about the first day, the kids really responded to that. So there's a lot of education and awareness that still needs to be done. I think hopefully one day we'll see our children going into school and bringing home a book on wellness, a class that they check into 5 days a week, not just a health class sophomore year of high school.
Right. Okay, so I wonder what sort of things are you seeing, Jan, when it comes to what people just don't comprehend about recovery and the process of recovery? I mean, I know when I was reporting this story, there's kind of been this assumption, okay, we'll put someone in a place where they spend their 30 days and they'll come out and they'll be whole. And I mean, as we all know, that just doesn't happen that way. So I'm just wondering, what don't people understand about recovery? What message you want to get through to people about that, the process?
Well, you mentioned one, which is that, it's not a 30-day journey and then you're done. It's a lifelong, for many people, recovery is a lifelong process. It's a chronic illness. So it's something that needs to be managed. We manage one's addiction so that they can be in recovery. The fact that there are multiple pathways to recovery. For some people that may be a 12-step or mutual support group. For others, that might be treatment. For others, it may be, therapy. So and even within the mutual support groups, there's, different types: women for sobriety, smart recovery, Dharma recovery, and all of those appeal to different people. And so we really need to take the time to recognize that and then to really individualize that. One of the things that we do at SpiritWorks is our goal is to help you figure out what your specific pathway is and then to stay on it. And to kind of follow up on something that Chris said, I'm going to steal your quote when I can remember it, but the kind of way that we think about that is that, there's a spectrum of illness around substance use disorder. And so, there is mild use disorder, moderate, and severe use disorder. And the end of that is where addiction lives. And so we need to know what the interventions are for each of those, because they're not necessarily the same. And then the other piece that Chris touched on just a little bit as well is the different kinds of harms that are associated. And we focused on the worst one, which is addiction. And particularly right now, we need to pay more attention to toxicity when it comes to the drug supply that's out here, because that's what's killing our loved ones, our friends, our family, our children, is how toxic the drug supply is. And then that other piece, which was also mentioned, is around being intoxicating, right? So that's using something, having the euphoria, thinking you can get in a car and driving. And so, we need to make sure we're paying attention to all of those, because just like there are many pathways of recovery, there are many pathways that lead to one's addiction or substance use disorder.
Okay, so one question that came in from the audience I wanted to ask. The question is, what options are available for elderly needing treatment, but with increased physical or mental challenges, for relatives who had long-term recovery but relapsed during isolation and pandemic after losing a spouse?
I actually know the answer to that question. So there are treatment centers, and there are also recovery support services that are specific to target populations. So in this case, Hanley Hazelden, I get nothing out of saying the name Hanley Hazelden, but that is a treatment center for older adults. It's in Florida, actually. And so being able to reach out and going on some of you'll be showing them later, but you can actually Treatment Finder, put in the specifics that somebody needs to look for, and they can access that. Okay,
Chris, I have a question for you. The questioner says, I learned that you recently partnered with Pursue Care Partners to increase access to telehealth addiction treatment. Can you tell me if there are efforts to bring this to Virginia?
So I think that what they're referring to is Herron Project.
Okay.
Yeah, so Herren Wellness is currently in Warrenton, Virginia.
Right.
Kind of to echo what Jan said, right? I have the honor and privilege to sit in rooms with older men and women who are still seeking sobriety. I've witnessed multiple people 50, 60 and older in their 70s walk into Herren Wellness, and I'm just amazed. I'm amazed of their willingness, the fight that they have in them to seek sobriety. So like Jan said, there are specific places. I'm extremely fortunate to share the room over the last 3 years with more than a few. That's something about recovery, right? I think culture matters. I think you have to, that's why I was so fortunate to have Herren Wellness in 2 locations, because, not every location is best suited for someone. And we can, move people and encourage them to go to a different location, maybe because there's an older population down there, or vice versa, a younger population. So, the connection matters, but I also believe in culture. I believe, if you establish a great culture around recovery and community in your center, the opportunity to have long-term sobriety increases drastically. So some of the ventures that Herron Project have taken on, it's an amazing organization. It's something that I am extremely proud of. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, and Herron Project, we talk about the people who are suffering from addiction, but through this pandemic, family have suffered severely because of addiction, and Herren Project has done an amazing job focusing on family. I believe we have 29 support groups online a week for families. I think families in the recovery world for years have been underserved. And I when I started Herren Wellness, that was one thing that I wanted to focus on, was supporting the family, encouraging the family, introducing the family to recovery, and educating the family on their journey, but as well as a parallel path with their loved one.
Right. Now, one thing you had mentioned before, Chris, which I think gets to the heart of a lot of this, is the matter of stigma. I mean, it's so hard to shake. And someone could be going through recovery for years and doing quite well, but there's still, people say, well, you're still in rehab, and so there's underlying, I don't know, disdain's probably too strong a word, but the question I have is, how do you work to reduce that over time? How do you get people to let go of that stigma?
I think what the words we use are critical, right? I look back on my recovery, and there's a part of me that's embarrassed that I have a book that's titled Basketball Junkie.
Yeah.
When that book was released and St. Martin's Press came up with the title, it made sense to me. I was 2.5 years sober. I'm embarrassed by that title. I don't like the word. I'm ashamed of the word. People should not be called that. I'm a huge, I have great disdain for the word rock bottom. I think it has no business being attached to this illness. I think rock bottom has misinformed many. I think it's caused families to not intervene earlier. There's for some reason, there's this notion that people have to suffer so much before they can recover. And I think the stigma of people not saying abuse, people not using the words rock bottom. When I overdosed in 2004, the headline in the Boston Herald was "What a shame." I don't think they would get away with that today. Yeah. So I do think that we've made significant progress around this. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think I'm helping the cause by introducing kids to the first day, and I think kids can understand when I talk about self-esteem and self-worth and the feelings that are attached to use. So we're getting there, I believe.
Yeah. So Jan, what do you think about what we can do to reduce stigma? And is that something that you run into when it comes to recovery?
Absolutely. And agreeing with what Chris said around language and words. Mm-hmm. And some people say it's semantics, and it really isn't. I mean, going back to rock bottom, number one, it's degrading, but number two, it's inaccurate. That people don't have to hit rock bottom. For many, rock bottom means the ability to recover is gone because that person has died. And with other illnesses, we don't wait until somebody is the sickest that they can be before we intervene to help them. So that's a big piece. And it really is a lot about education as well, and helping people learn that it's a disease, that it's chronic, some of the things that we talked about earlier. There are people who are able to then have the education and have the awareness and understanding, but then what happens is we do a really poor job of disseminating that information. And so that's an area that we've really strived to do better, is to make sure that people are getting the latest information and the science-based information and those kinds of things, because the promise and hope of recovery are real. I mean, there are more than 20 million people who are living in recovery. And so we know that it happens and that it works, and that for many, it's the expectation. And what we need to do is extend our reach into the communities that don't have the access to the services and supports, and to really make those resources available so that everybody can have an opportunity.
So I remember reading that it's a pretty low percentage of people who are abusing substances who ultimately seek treatment. Now, is that still the case? I mean, my understanding was a lot of people just don't do it.
Some of why they don't do it has to do with stigma,
yeah, right.
And has to do with people not really believing or knowing that people can and do recover. And a lot of times, I mean, you've gone through treatment, and if the only expectation is perfection, meaning you will never use again, that's a pretty difficult reason to try again, and so then all of those things about failure and you didn't get it right, and if we're not educating and including family members, they're having the same sentiments that, I paid all of this money and we've invested all this time. But when we look at, substance use disorder and addiction as a chronic illness and recognize that recovery needs management, much like any other chronic illness, the statistics for people in recovery are actually better than they are with folks. And then if you take the bigger, as Chris has mentioned, if you take the bigger and not just look at the primary, if we just don't focus on solely the use or non-use and really package this in the way that's accurate, which is that this is a health and wellness condition. And so, not using isn't a prize for many people, but being healthy, being reunited with your family, having purpose and meaning, those are all really good reasons to do this very difficult work of remaining abstinent.
Now, a question that's somewhat related to that, and I'll ask you first, Chris, is what do you feel about, and this is from the audience, what do you feel about tough love? Which is, always been, we just have to be tough with the kid. We have to, we just have to make them work their way through it and not be so forgiving. And I know I'm grossly oversimplifying it, but I just wanted to get your take on that.
I'm a fan of love, of the sick and suffering. I know that I am who I am today because people loved me when I couldn't love myself or didn't know how to love myself. That being said, I think, people, family members, as I mentioned, I think family has been underserved and uneducated and not willing to participate. And I think family members not willing to participate or recognize is part of the stigma. So I think a lot of family members go in uneducated. I was on the phone with a woman today whose daughter, is 18 years old and she's struggling with fentanyl, and her response was, I'm going to put her in therapy once a week. If my daughter at 18 years old is on fentanyl, I am going to seek treatment for her immediately. But that being said, I think everyone's heart is different. I think everybody's tolerance is different. So to just put it in a box and say, everyone has to follow this is not fair. But I do think that, families and loved ones need to be educated and learn about substance use disorder and mental health and mental illness. So to get back to your question, tough love, I'm all about loving people who are suffering from this illness. And that doesn't mean, I have a father who struggles from alcoholism. And sometimes I have to love from a distance. I have to have space in between it. I'm not going to be right next to it. I'm going to love them from afar. So there's different ways to love, but I'm not a fan of tough love.
Okay. Jan, what's your take on that?
We say love toughly,
Yeah.
Instead of tough love, that we lead with love, and we know that it's going to be difficult at times. and that, family members, concerned significant others need to take care of themselves so that they can continue to show up when it's very difficult. And there are absolutely times when the best thing to do is to have that distance and space, so that if your family member does reach out to you again, that you're able to be present for them. But love first, love always, love toughly.
So a somewhat related question, and this is one for both of you. And Jan, if you can go first, how do you approach a family member or friend who appears to be struggling with substance use? How do you get them to accept help? And if it's something you're worried about yourself, what's the first step you can take?
To me, the first step is about compassion and kindness, and the recognition that we're suffering or struggling with an illness, and that there's hope that people can and do get better, and being able to then do things like invite the person or encourage the person to change. There's lots of different interventions and recovery support strategies for family members, just as there are with the individual with addiction themselves. Some understanding that, change, new behavior takes time. It takes practice. You just aren't going to wake up one day and be able to get it. Things like helping them, knowing what the resources are, and pointing them in the direction. One of the things that we talk a lot about is catching the person when they are exhibiting the right behavior, the one that you want to see. Recognize that, your loved ones are using for a reason, that the behavior makes sense of what they're doing. People will say, why do they keep doing that? We can help family members understand that there is a reason for them to do that, to recognize things like ambivalence, and that's normal for people to have ambivalence. And as both Chris and I talked about earlier, one size doesn't fit all. And then being able to learn some things around how best to communicate and to have expectations around behavior. I mean, certainly people can have natural consequences, but punishment and natural consequences aren't the same thing.
Right. So what's your take on that, Chris?
I'm in full support of what Jan just said. I can speak from personal experience. I've failed at many interventions with family members. For all that I know and what I've been through and the people I've helped, I've struggled with helping the people that I love. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of toxicity that's connected within family units around substance use, around mental health. So for me personally, I've learned over time that I can't be directly involved in the intervention. That I have to have someone who's not tied to me or my loved one, that, they're going to go in there and talk factually and try to encourage and navigate the treatment process for my loved one. Because for me, it turns into the history that we've gone through together, my past history, how long it took me to get sober, and so on and so forth. So if we go back a couple of questions, I think early intervention is critical. I really do. I think if we can intervene early and get out and educate our loved ones and know that, there are avenues to wellness and to feel better about oneself, I think that's important as well. So, interventions are a critical part of this, and hopefully, as time goes by, we'll start seeing people intervening much earlier.
So when you mention interventions, I think in people's minds, they think of the model they see on TV where, a family says, we're desperate, this person's not responding to us, we invite them over and we're not going to let them leave the room, and we're going to do it this way. And that seems like, I'm oversimplifying, but kind of an act of desperation. And I wonder, is that ever a valid approach, or when is that a valid approach, or how does that fit into what both of you are doing?
I think there's multiple approaches, and I think Jan can talk to that better than I can. I think there's many approaches to interventions. And, if you talk to interventionists and, you listen to how they go about it and, educating their family before going in and putting people in the right spots, giving a certain amount of time for people to share and what they're going to share about. So yes, I mean, I know that there's strategy around interventions. It's funny because I would go to meetings and I would hear people complain about, the interventions that they've had in their life. And, I never had one. And there was part of me that was like, hey, how come nobody ever, staged an intervention for me? So it's, I think there is a strategy. I think Jan can touch on it and add to that, and we'll hear what she has to say.
Okay. What do you say, Jan?
I say that, Chris, you were intervened upon. It might not have been your family, but it was your profession. It was the police. It was so we do have interventions. Sometimes they're not formal interventions, which, the one that we often hear and know about is the one where people are sitting in the circle and they're, that person's suitcase is packed and the goal is to send them to treatment immediately after that. And there are all kinds of other opportunities, people getting educated. One of the things that we know is that the family system will change when family members, get more educated themselves and they start getting healthy. The person with addiction, that will cause a change in the family dynamics just by virtue that people are getting healthier themselves. And so, another one, there's also a formal called screening and brief intervention, and then referral to treatment. So once again, it depends upon what the needs of the individual are and really just recognizing that one size doesn't fit all.
Right. Another question we've received is, how do you assist a friend with substance abuse when their significant other is enabling their behavior and lack of self-esteem that seems to be the trigger for their substance abuse? And this kind of gets into the whole issue of, well, if you see a friend who has a need for help, how do you help with that without getting in the middle of, a tough situation? Go ahead, Jen.
Sure. We have a strategy that's called flashing one's headlights. Mm-hmm. And so, if you were driving down the road and it was dark outside and you didn't have your headlights on, somebody would flash their lights to let you know that yours weren't on. If you're like me, you're going to keep going. You're going to think that means a policeman is ahead of you. Once you realize that that's not what it is, the next person hopefully is going to drive down the road, same road, see you, flash their lights again. And so that series of people, letting you know more than once that something's going on, using I statements, I'm concerned about you. I love you. Your health and wellness matter to me. So being able to, once again, learn some strategies that would be helpful, which are going to invite or inspire somebody to change their behavior. But I mean, Chris is so right in the recognition that this is a family illness. And we know that individuals do better when families recover together. And so by not including family members and by truly over focusing on the individual who is ill means that we spend more time separating families and they get mad, they get frustrated. That parallel process for them is equally damaging and destructive. And so we need to help everyone recover. I have a passion, we work with children as well who are growing up in households with addiction. And so, that's another area. And those children have really struggled during this time period also.
I mean, if you have a situation where you try to get help for a family member and they reject that help, and so you say, okay, we will try to set really tough boundaries for you, or strict boundaries, and that way we'll try to deal with this ourselves. but then you have a concern about if they think the boundaries are too tough, they may spiral out of control. I mean, it's a lot of really tough personal situations you're dealing with here, and they can be very delicate. So, I guess I wonder how you deal with something like that. If you have someone who said, no, I'm not going to get treatment, and you try to handle it yourself, does that work?
I think personally recovery is attractive.
Yeah.
I think it's very attractive. And I think, if, I look at my life and I believe that I've encouraged, I don't like using the word inspired, but people to get help and seek help and take that first step into treatment. But I have family members who won't. I have family members who, one of the proudest things that I've ever achieved in my life is opening up Herren Wellness at 10 years sober. And I have family members that live 10 miles from it and have never come to see it. And those family members belong there. I think boundaries for people who have loved ones suffering, I think is to get healthy. Is to get educated and know that you're going to be okay, and you're going to be okay because you are on your own path of recovery, and you're learning and educating yourself and connecting with others. So when that loved one is seeking help or pushing back, you know how to respond appropriately.
Right. Okay. So somewhat related to that.
Mm-hmm.
The question that I've had, that I've heard from other people, is when someone is in recovery, and as both it's a long, difficult process. How do you encourage someone through that process? How do you stay positive about it, and how do you avoid from asking them too much about how their recovery is going? I mean, it's one of those things. Again, I mean, you're juggling a lot of things here when you do that. Go ahead, Chris.
I think because, again, a lot of misinformation, and I think lack of education around substance use, people feel like they need to walk on eggshells.
Mm-hmm.
I recover out loud. I love it. Recovery has given me more than I've ever imagined in life. And not only that, it's my greatest life achievement. It's not only changed my life, but it's changed everybody who loved me, and it's changed their life drastically. So I like the fact that I share my recovery with people, who are close to me. But there's also sacrifices that people in early recovery have to make. And I know I did. My wife had been through a lot through my addiction. And in order to put her at peace, there were sacrifices that I had to make. And oftentimes they were humbling. So I had to kind of change my perspective and change seats with my loved ones and see what they were going through and what they were suffering from. So I think there are multiple groups that support families. And I think it's to find a group, is to have a connection, is to establish a community around this topic. And like raise your hand and get informed and listen to others and take advice.
Jan?
Because they're not alone, right? A lot of people feel they're alone. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's interesting, right? I was sitting in a hotel lobby and I was with two sets of parents. I was in Pennsylvania, and one parent, the mom and dad, were talking very openly and loud about, their son who was struggling with heroin. And when I pivoted and went to the other family who wanted to speak, they whispered it to me. They talked very softly about their loved one who's struggling. So two different perspectives, right? I mean, that family was yelling it, and one family was very quiet about it. But whether, whether you are comfortable or not, there are places where you can find comfort and love and people who are going through what you're going through.
Right. Okay. Jan?
Well, I think the first thing that I want to say to all family members is that your fear is real, and I understand the fear that you would have, particularly because of the toxicity of that drug supply. So knowing that at any time, parents are living with the fact that anytime they may get that phone call is kind of how I've heard people describe it. And, what I know about being working with folks through that is that while some people's loved ones do die, life will be different on the other side of it. And there are people who have that shared experience, sadly, and will continue to walk alongside you. I think that we have really done family members an injustice by, calling them names, by saying they're codependent or they're enablers or things like that, and certainly there are negative things that people can do, and sometimes it doesn't come from lack of love, it comes from lack of knowledge. And people are scared, and it's understandable when what we see more of is outcomes that aren't associated with thriving and living. I mean, we see on the media, they're not showing the success stories usually of people who are in recovery, who, like Chris and myself, who have lives beyond our wildest dreams. And so those are the messages that need to be communicated far more than they are. Family members absolutely need to be included. And, we do a parents group at our center in Williamsburg and have been fortunate enough during this time period because things are online, to start working with our parents and family members in Warrenton as well. And when we first started that group, it was all parents whose children were alive. And I can remember when we had the first family asked to join whose child had died. And I was scared about making that decision. And I decided, let's see. I went to the group and asked them, and they said that would be fine. And one of the things that family has been able to teach others is that, one of the things they used to say is, I don't know how I will live or how I could survive if my child died. Mm-hmm. And so they are living, they are surviving. It's different. Some of what we do is we celebrate their child's birthday. We know their children's names. All of those things are really important. We do them for other people who have lost their children for other reasons. So there's a lot of help and hope that's out here, and it really is, my responsibility. What I'm hearing tonight is that we get to do a better job making sure that we're reaching family members and putting up as many resources for family members as we do for the individuals themselves who are struggling or suffering.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And that, one thing that I've heard from people who's, particularly when their children had substance abuse issues, where they felt like, as you said before, always waiting for that call, or they feel like there's a tripwire somewhere, at some point, all this is going to fall apart, and it's a very fragile balance that they have. And so I understand the need to work with families at the same time, so they understand how challenging that recovery process can be. So there's a question that came in about any suggestions for how to help siblings if their brother or sister is suffering with substance use disorder. So essentially, I guess, if you know people who's, the siblings of someone who's doing that, how do you help them? Go ahead, Jan.
Sure, it's pretty much the same. There are groups that are for siblings, recovery support groups, because the issues are different, right? And so, I spend a lot of time initially doing a one-on-one conversation with a sibling because inevitably they're angry. They're angry with the amount of attention that their sibling has gotten. And so they too need the education and support that's particular to them. So that notion of multiple pathways, and making sure that the recovery support services, treatment services, whatever it is that a person needs, are specific in context to whom it is. Sometimes that's not possible, right? Sometimes there are mutual support groups, for example, Al-Anon, where everyone is in there together. Mm-hmm. But even once you join some of these groups, you'll find somebody else with your story, right? So that's where sponsorship and mentorship comes in. You might be able to pick a sibling, somebody else who's in a sibling set who gets it. And so that person would be the one that you would approach. So again, in short, there are specific groups and meetings for siblings. And if you find yourself in a larger mixed group, being able to make sure that you're seeking out and listening to stories of people who are sharing their experience, strength, and hope with regards to what you need.
Right. Chris, what's your feeling about the ways that you can work with family members and how you need to approach them differently or not?
I want to go back a little bit. Hopefully one day, we don't have these questions, and that we know how to respond and we know how to react. And there isn't so much fear behind encouraging someone, intervening with someone who you love and you want to help, and introduce them to services that they require and they so badly need. Hopefully one day, we won't have to have these forums and everybody would know how to respond accordingly. To your question, can you ask the question again, please?
Well, it's how the whole matter of dealing with whether it's siblings or other members of the family, to help them more clearly understand what a person is going through and what their role is in that.
We talked about this earlier. I take great pride with Herren Wellness and Herron Project, with the amount of work we do with families. I think it's absolutely necessary. I think it's the responsible way to approach this. I think when you bring families into it, there's great connection and pride, not only in their own pathway to recovery, but their loved one. And again, I think, like I said earlier, I think recovery is attractive. And when you have people in your family who are recovering, or loved ones or friends, it becomes somewhat inspiring and attractive. So the information, the education, is critical. I think, when you walk onto, a lot of people, we have children that come to visit loved ones. And when they get to Herren Wellness and, we walk up to them and whether it's a high five or a hug, you hear them say often, "This is not what I expected." Mm-hmm. I expected this place to be much scarier where my mom or dad is. It's not, what people perceive it to be. And I think once they're introduced to that once they're introduced to where people can heal and where people can recover, that fear goes away somewhat. So, as Jan and I have both said throughout this seminar, that I don't know. I would like to hear Jan's perspective. That why has family been underserved in this? Is it lack of, is it laziness amongst the treatment community? Why for so many years did loved ones, my wife, for instance, when I went to treatment in 2008, we pulled up to the front door and they said, "You can come, you can't get out of the vehicle." And I was escorted into the building. I don't know why family has taken the back seat or haven't even been given a seat at the table when it came to their loved ones' recovery. And, some part of me, the cynical part of me, wants to say it's been, treatment centers have been lazy and they don't want to engage in that work with family. But for me, it's something that I take great pride in. And, you know, I knew I was sober, truly sober, when I saw sobriety in my children. Mm. When I saw my kids' eyes smiling, that's when I knew I had something real and something special. And that didn't happen overnight. But my actions and my commitment and my willingness, you know, one day I looked into their eyes and their eyes were different. Their smiles were different. You know, I tell guests at my wellness center all the time, I can, you know, it's hard for me because I walk through my house and there's pictures pre-recovery, post-recovery, and into my recovery. And it's really evident. And, you know, the way my kids stand and the way they're smiling, recovery has opened up their lives and put a sense of peace and ease in their heart. And that's what we try to do at Herren Wellness, is that families need to understand this isn't scary. You know, although it's emotional, but they shouldn't feel that where mom and dad or brother and sister go is a place that they don't want to visit. Right.
So, Jan, in response to Chris's question, why do you think families have, in some ways, gotten short shrift in dealing with this?
Oddly, I just had this very conversation with one of my my esteemed colleagues and heroes, the woman, her name is Sis Wanger, and she runs the National Association of Children of Addiction. And she has asked this question for 20 some odd years. And she and I had a conversation the other day, and part of it is that many people historically, the treatment industry grew out of individuals who were in recovery who wanted to give back, and then got some education to be able to do that. And one of the things that she pointed out was a lot of us have not done our own family work. And so we don't find value in bringing family members to the table because we haven't done our own work around family. And that could look like we were children of addiction or alcohol, and we grew up and we haven't reconciled that inner child within us, or we are adults now and we're in recovery, and we aren't so proud of the things that we did to our own family members and what happened to them during that process. And so sadly, I have to agree with her. And so for me, part of my work is elevating that and challenging my friends and just making them recognize that, you know, that this is really bigger than us. I mean, people with addiction, we are self-centered, grandiose, all of those lovely things. You know, I'm my favorite person, you know, so I used to think that the only person that I was hurting was myself, you know, and the longer and more mature I got in my recovery, I learned that I was hurting more people. So a lot of it is that the way the industry started and rose up was the overemphasis on the person and not the family members. A couple of things that are neat that are happening, you know, specifically here in Virginia, equally, you know, there's what's called a recovery ally training. Mm-hmm. And it started on a college campus, but it's now SpiritWorks is one of the two creators of the recovery ally training. And it's very similar to mental health first aid, but it's specifically around addiction and recovery. And so it helps family members, concerned significant others, whomever, really begin to understand a lot of what Chris and I have described tonight, and to give them some more tools and opportunities to help themselves get well and heal also. So that's a resource. There's other models that are out there, the invitation to change approach. The Addiction Policy Forum has come up with a resource that's on specifically for family members on treatment and recovery. So once again, they can begin to learn what all this stuff means and how to access it for themselves.
Right. Okay. Well, I just want to tell our audience, if you want to get more information on helping yourself or a loved one, there will be a slide that comes up at the end of the webinar, which has contact information for very good resources. I want to take this opportunity to thank both Jan and Chris for making this conversation so enlightening and useful. And for those who have joined in through the magic of Zoom, I hope it's been helpful. Good night and good health to all of you. And thanks again, Chris and Jan.
Thank you.
Yeah.